So as an introduction, my name is Hans O'Sullivan. I'm the CEO and co-founder of the company, and my colleague Chris Ferry is the other co-founder of the company. So a bit of history of where we actually have come from. I've been around a fair few years in the technology industry, since 1989 in the storage industry, when I founded a company called Eurologic. I don't think many of you are long enough in the tooth to remember Eurologic. Do you? Oh, good. So we were pioneers in RAID and fiber channel storage, mainly through OEM channels. Not a household name, but you'd be surprised how many people were using our technology. After Eurologic, founded a company called Ellipsan with Chris, and Ellipsan were early pioneers in iSCSI technology. Both of those companies we ended up selling to Adaptec, who unfortunately are relatively gone themselves now at this stage. And after a 2-year non-compete and 2-year tie-in for the engineering team, a lot of us got together again and founded StorMagic. So it's the same two founders that have been in the industry a while, and the same engineering and development team that worked with us in both Eurologic and Ellipsan. Chris has also been in the industry quite a long time. He says 25 years developing innovative storage solutions. I think he's only trying to hide his age. He's been around a bit longer than that, but I suppose it's specializing in storage since that time. And to add to his list, he also founded a company called K-Power, which was actually purchased by Eurologic some years ago. I think around 2000 we bought K-Power. Right, yeah, around 2000. The history of StorMagic. When we started StorMagic, what we wanted to do was to simplify storage. At that stage in 2006, in our view, storage was far too complex. There was too many buzzwords, it was too expensive to implement, and the personnel you required was too expensive. So we wanted to start up to develop a simple storage solution very much tied into Windows management that was very simple to install, very simple to use, and basically did what it said on the tin. We developed that product and it worked extremely well. The customers that bought it really loved it. But being quite honest, you try and sell something that you're saying is easy to use and simple. Everybody says the same. And we did find difficulty in getting through to our target audience, the SMB. So we actually changed direction a little bit and re-released the technology as a virtual storage appliance. One of the first to do that in the market. Working very closely with VMware and on top of ESX. That was also aimed at the SMB, and we had quite a lot of unique features that obviously we'll talk about as we go into the presentation that differentiated us from what other people were doing in the market. In 2011, we actually refocused a little bit again. We realized that the technology that we had developed had some very unique advantages for large distributed enterprises, for the problems that they actually had at the edge of the enterprise. The benefit from our point of view is that we could actually focus on customers with a lot of sites that brought higher revenue into us, but we actually saved them a lot of money. It was a win-win for both of us. And as we refocused on that in 2011, that really is when our company took off and started to grow. And since then, obviously we've had new releases of the product, new capabilities. The first release was purely on ESX. We now also released about a year or so ago on Hyper-V as well. Our target market. Well, let's look at what's actually happening in the market. And I don't know if you've got a couple of you from Europe, and you would have heard the expression teaching your grandmother to suck eggs. You know this, right? But just to repeat it anyway, maybe there's some people online who aren't realizing this. Everybody's trying to centralize. And what do they mean by centralize? Are they moving to the cloud? Are they moving into a data center? What they're trying to do is they're trying to improve manageability of their applications. And in moving to the center, it's making it easy for them to do that. And there's, as I say, there's a lot of different ways of actually doing that. However, in solving problems, you often create new problems. And that is where we actually come in to actually help some of what's actually left behind. Because as they're moving a lot of these applications to the center, there's certain applications that actually do not run well in the center for different reasons. So it could be for performance reasons. If you have a lot of processing that's going on the edge in remote locations, you may not have the latency, you may not have the bandwidth you require to run those applications at the edge. Or availability reasons, or it could be compliance reasons on where your data is actually kept. There's actually quite a lot of quite key applications that they must continue to run at the edge. So let's look at some of these remote sites, the distributed enterprise, the edge of the enterprise. what's actually happening at the edge of the enterprise? Well, they still want the benefits of centralization, but they need to run some of these applications at the edge. So what they'd like to do is to move their management of those applications to the center, to be able to see it from the center and to reduce the cost of actually running these applications at the edge. The first step they do in trying to achieve that is virtualization. If I jump down to the second half of the slide here, this is what we have found is typical in the edge or remote sites that we're actually working with. They have very, very little data. They typically have 2 terabytes, often a lot less, of data for each remote location. We've seen it going right down to tens of gigabytes. So they have very little data, probably the size of half a disk drive. They have virtualized. They want high availability. But if you want high availability in a virtual environment, you have to have shared storage. They want to do that as cost effectively as possible. They typically have 7 or 8 key applications running. Most of them are in fairly harsh environments, in a broom closet, under a table, nailed to a wall. You'd see some quite horrific situations. They're not computer room type environments that they have them in. And set and forget mentality. Typically, they want these applications to do a job. They don't want to keep modifying it. They don't want to keep changing it. And you need to think a bit broader in what we refer to as the edge of the enterprise. It's why I haven't been using the term robo, because automatically you think, oh yeah, remote office, branch office, that's insurance company, that's a bank. No, the edge of the enterprise could be things like wind farms. Wind farms by definition are in remote locations. So at the edge of the enterprise, you've multiples of them, you need to know what's going on, you need to be able to manage it from a central location. It could be one of our customers, I'll talk a bit more about them later, the German Army. They use us for battlefield communication systems. So if you think of the edge of the enterprise as these type of remote applications, you can see where I mean that set and forget. They wanted to do the job. They don't want it to change. In fact, they often don't want the capability of change at the edge. They don't want anybody to be able to come in, sit at the console and change what those applications are actually doing. So a lot of these, going back to the top of this slide, they're virtualizing, they need shared storage, harsh environments, no local IT. You won't see many IT guys being dropped into the middle of the battlefield and battlefield communication systems or sitting out in the middle of a wind farm. And they want to do so as cost effectively as possible, but they must have that high availability. That high availability is critical to them. The edge of the enterprise is where the enterprise meets the customer. If what's working there, or should be working there, fails, you have an unhappy customer. And that customer, if it's a retail store and he goes up and he wants to cash out his shopping trolley and he can't do that, he'll wait 5 minutes at most. After that, he's leaving the trolley and he's going next door. And he's unhappy, he'll probably never come back again. So it's critical to the enterprise that those things that are running at the edge keeps their customer happy. They still want to centralize, so they want to be able to do that. They want to be able to manage everything from the center, from the data center, everything that's at the edge. It needs to be small IT footprint. As I said, nailed to the wall, under the table, no computer room environment, and as simple and as automated as possible. This word simple is very, very key to what we do. They don't want bells, they don't want whistles, they want it to plug in, work, do the job, set and forget. So we said they need shared storage, and obviously the first thing you think of is we'll go and buy a SAN. And SAN is how this problem was solved previous. But don't forget, it's 2 terabytes. I've got that in, well, my laptop in my bag, I've got a 2 terabyte disk. What are you doing with 2 terabytes on a SAN? It's overkill. It's adding complexity. It's adding cost. And worse still, it's adding a single point of failure. If that SAN fails, everything's gone. Unless you put the second SAN in and mirror across them. Hang on a sec, now I've got my 2 servers, 2 SANs, I have 7 or 8 applications, I've got all the cost back in. You don't want to do that. And it's not just the capital cost, which is kind of obvious, it's also the operating cost. You have to power that, you have to cool that, you have to spare for that, you have to train up support to be able to maintain those SANs, and as well as that, you need to be able to understand and use the management interface for those SANs. So they want to be able to have shared storage as simply as possible and as cost effectively as possible. The other advantage in getting away from the SAN is you can move away from being tied into any particular hardware vendor. If you do this through software, as I'll show you how we do in a few minutes, and Chris will talk about in a lot more detail, if you do it through software, you're independent of the hardware vendor. You can change hardware vendor as you go through the life cycle or use of that product. You're very quiet in here. I was warned that you guys are going to be asking me questions non-stop. Is it just that it's after lunch and everybody's falling asleep here, or?
I have a question regarding the fact that you are not talking about, you are talking about SAN, but actually one of the biggest problem that I see is backup in the remote sites.
Yes.
It's not only managing storage.
You're quite correct, and it's a problem that we constantly see as well. And you know what's actually stranger about it? If you talk to these larger enterprises, and we see a lot within retail, they will tell you that backup is one of their problems. But what they mean by backup is totally different depending on the customer you're talking about. So in some cases, they're saying, how do I protect and back up my data on site? Then the next customer would say, how do I protect and back up my data to the center? And then you go to the next customer, and what they're really looking for is disaster recovery. So yes, it is a problem for them, and how do they protect their data? Now, that's not the problem we solve today. It's an area of technology that we are enabling. We've no intention of going into the backup market. There's some very, very good solutions that are actually out there. But we do have some plans that we won't talk about quite yet to actually provide enabling technology that helps to make it far more cost effective for people to provide backup, whether they want it locally, in the center, or as disaster recovery, using their existing preferred vendors to provide those services. So it's enabling technology underneath that. But that is something that's well into next year before we'll be releasing that technology.
I have a question. I don't know if you're going to come to it eventually anyway. You're talking a lot about the edge of the enterprise and small-scale deployments. Is that really where you fit, or do you scale well to be deployed in a data center as well?
So we will talk a lot more about that, but I'll answer the question anyway. It's a good time to actually answer it. So there's absolutely no reason why you cannot use our technology in the data center. Our technology is extremely scalable, but we're a relatively small company, right? We're 50 people. There's a lot of very, very big companies that are chasing after the data center. And there's there's very few companies that realize the opportunity that's at the edge. So it is purely a marketing consideration that we're focusing at the edge, because we have unique advantages that our competitors cannot solve.
But if I was looking at something on the edge, maybe it leans into Enrico's point a little bit. I would want to be able to protect that data to another site, maybe the corporate data center. So I would like to be able to replicate that data back.
Correct.
And if I can't deploy your technology in the data center as well, on at better scale, then how would I? Because you're not going to allow your technology to replicate to somebody else's, or that.
Why not?
Well, I'm not saying you won't allow to, but let's say I've got VMAX or 3PAR or something in the data center. I can't replicate StorMagic back to that natively.
Why not? Using whatever replication package you want to, you can do that within vSphere, you can do that within Hyper-V already.
Sure, I mean lower down the stack though.
Correct. So, as I say, that's not technology we have today, and that's not the problem that we actually solve today. So the problem we solve today is they want high availability that's cost effective at the remote site. They also want to protect their data. I'm not saying they don't. What I'm saying is that's not the immediate problem that we actually solve today. But to answer your question, what we typically find is that the customers will come to us to solve the problem at the edge. Then they'll say, well, I've got my distribution centers that have maybe half a dozen servers on, and this technology fits extremely well then. And they'll often use us in the data center then as well. But it's not where our prime marketing is actually aimed at to begin with. We aim at saying, we can solve your problem at the edge.
What we typically find is that with the customers we're selling into, they want to do replication back to the data center more at the application level rather than at the SAN or virtual SAN level. And what we find is typically, with the customers we go to, there's a wide range of different solutions they're using. Some will be using things actually built into the applications they're running. Some may be using VMware products or backup products from other companies. While you can replicate, at the SAN level, at the level we do, and we have got some technology that does that, it's not really at the right level of granularity that a lot of customers need for the applications they're running. So there's no single solution to that problem.
Okay.
Okay. So the whole area of virtual storage appliances, that space has been somewhat validated over the last few years. So VMware released their VSA product in 2011. And a lot of people said, oh boy, are you in trouble now? VMware's got a product. Our business took off in 2011 because customers said, wow, this is an interesting concept, but the product's not that brilliant. I'm being polite. Is there something better out there that does a better job? And that's actually when our business started to take off. VMware have recently, as I'm sure you all know, released their vSAN product, a much better product, a much better design, but aimed at the smaller data center. And it doesn't actually scale down well to where we go.
Aimed at the smaller data. I'm sure the next version of vSAN will support 64 nodes in a cluster.
Yeah, no, it's not. It's aimed at the data center. I think it's not the smaller data center.
I'm talking about the first release.
Oh, okay. Because I would think that vSAN is a kick in the teeth to the VSA market, because VMware at one point had a VSA and a lot of competition there as well. So they're like, well, I'll tell you what, let's change it, bake it into the kernel. Nobody else can do that, and we can at the same time say we had a VSA, we didn't think it was a great design, this is a better design, and they've got a lot of people that like them, and suddenly the VSA market is like...
You're actually quite correct, right? Except where does it not fit? Right? What are the problems with their vSAN technology that we actually solve? For starters, you can't go below 3 nodes. So you're talking about 3 servers. If you've got 1,000 locations, you've now added 50% of hardware cost to those locations. You must have a mixture of SSD drives and rotating drives. So that's adding cost and complexity when, don't forget, the typical remote site has 2 terabytes of data. So their technology is very good technology. It's a very good product, but it doesn't actually scale down to meet the edge. They say it's a very good solution for Robo, but talk to the customers and it doesn't meet their requirements. They want simplicity, they want ease of management, they want to have a 2-server. I mean, referred to recently as the holy grail for the edge is 2-server high availability.
Can you scale above 2 nodes?
Of course we can, yes. Yeah, so we don't have any limitations on how far you can scale. The limitations actually come in from the point of view of the hypervisor and what it will actually allow you to do.
Quick question. If VMware really want to move away, if they want to close down the VSA market in future versions of ESXi, are you somewhat bound? I know that you support Hyper-V now as well, but are you somewhat bound to the hypervisor vendor's roadmap if they suddenly start locking things down in the hypervisor so that your product doesn't work?
Well, personally, I don't see how they could actually do that, but I want to see if Chris has a...
Well, I mean, one of the things is certification. So VMware have had a certification program for VSAs. They actually call them SVAs on the certification program back since about 2011. And I think we were actually the first company to go through that certification program. They haven't said anything about killing that yet. And there's certainly certification for SVAs, VSAs, whatever, with vSphere 2015 that's coming out. So yes, potentially they could kill it. I mean, they can't stop it working, but they could kill the certification program, which would make life a lot more difficult. But they don't show any signs of doing that within the next, certainly with the next release of vSphere.
Okay.
So a little bit about our product. Actually, noticing the time, I'm going to jump over to this slide here because basically I can say it all on this particular slide. So just to make sure you understand exactly what it is we have a virtual SAN solution that actually, it's a virtual appliance, runs on top of the hypervisor. It takes ownership of the storage that is actually in the servers or connected to the servers and turns that into a virtual SAN. It then synchronously mirrors that to one or more other similar installations on other servers, and it makes that look like as if it was a physical SAN, but it's a virtual SAN. So it's allowing you to use internal low-cost drives to actually turn into a virtual SAN. It's an active-active solution, so that's giving you better performance using less CPU and other resources. Highly available. If one of the servers fails, everything automatically fails over to the other server. And you asked the question about scalable. We keep talking about 2-server because that's what our market particularly wants, but there's no reason why you can't scale further from 2 servers, and Chris will go into a lot more detail about that later.
So support for vVols and all that stuff? And
we're on the vVol program, so we will be adding support for vVols at some point.
So I don't know if you have plans to talk about that later, but the difference could be the management part more than the remote part. So you have these
Correct.
2 nodes, and okay, but if I deploy 1,000 of your SB SAN, so things are very complicated to manage
Yes.
at that level. So do you provide a central management?
Yeah, I'll talk about that in my section a bit, yeah.
And you're quite correct, because that is very, very important to the customer. If you've got thousands of locations, how do you manage that? And what management interfaces do you actually support to be able to do that? But I'd say that actually comes in a lot of detail in Chris's presentation later. So just a bit more about us. So far we've 30,000 licenses that are out there. I think that's actually the highest level of virtual SAN implementation that there is in the market. We've over 1,200 customers. Our largest customer has 2,200 locations. All of those locations are actually managed from one central location, which, as I say, Chris will go into, but answers your question a little bit. And we're fairly widespread, 64 countries across 6 continents. The verticals that we tend to address, retail is a very important vertical for us. It's our biggest vertical. Energy, manufacturing, government, and in fact what's not on here, hospitality is becoming a very important vertical for us as well. Typically companies that have a lot of remote locations that need to be kept running. And I think if I remember rightly, that's the last slide. It is, thank you.
Just on the facts that you had there, what's the biggest cluster that you've got out there?
The biggest cluster, Chris, can you remember?
You say theoretically there's no limit, but realistically, what are your largest?
Nearly all of our deployments are just simply 2-node ones.
Yeah.
There may be 1 or 2 with more nodes, but it's generally just 2-node.
Okay.
That's why people go to us. I mean, I can think of a couple of sites that have 8 nodes, but people are not going to us for very large clusters.
so you guys replicate the data across the 2 nodes, or is it RAID protected, or?
It's synchronous mirroring across the nodes. So
Synchronous mirroring?
Yeah.
So the typical...
So I'll describe that more in my section coming
Yeah,
up.
okay.
I skipped over it a little bit because it'd be duplicating what Chris is talking about later.
And sorry, why do people not go to you for the bigger ones? Just because you're a smaller company?
Probably because we don't focus on it. So there's some very nice scale-out implementations that are out there today. And there's a lot to choose from. There's some very big brand names to actually go for. Where there isn't choice is at the entry level at the edge.
And you wouldn't call this hyperconvergence? Although, with the expert here, that it would seem like, because you have compute and storage in the same node, this is hyperconvergence.
It is.
Yeah.
It very definitely is.
But you didn't mention a word.
I hate buzzwords. I didn't mention software-defined storage either.
That's true.